Welcome, welcome. I'm glad we got a great group today. Give it another 30 seconds or so, but I appreciate your everyone being timely and joining us today. Awesome. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started because we got some stuff to cover today, and I'm sure people will be coming in and out. But first off, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for our second session in the Wild and Scenic River training series. Today, we're going to be talking about Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. And just as a reminder, my name is Angie Furman. I'm the River Training Center Coordinator for River Management Society, located in Southern Oregon, where yesterday it was snowing and today it's nice and sunny outside. But I'm happy to be here today, and I'm thankful that all of you are here. And just want to do a quick little thing about RMS, River Management Society, for those who might not be familiar. We're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to support professionals who study, protect, and manage North America's rivers. We do this in a variety of ways. We help develop and host training workshops and multi-day, single day, virtual, in-person. We have events where we encourage networking, like at our symposium coming up at the end of the month and some of our chapter trips. We encourage people to share information with each other, troubleshoot, and we're really here to help people network. And we're also the home of the River Training Center, the National Rivers Project, the River Studies and Leadership Certificate. So all sorts of great projects. I encourage you to go to our website and check us out if you're not familiar. So just a couple of things as we're getting started today. Again, welcome. I encourage you to use that chat box there in the Zoom panel. You can go ahead and open that. Let us know who you are, where you're from. What's the weather like where you're at today? Help us get an idea of who's joining us in this room. And I also just want to set some expectations. This training series is really participant based, and I like to say you're kind of going to get out of it what you're putting into it. And so we're really hoping that everyone can be pretty present here today, and we're going to be doing some different activities. We're going to be doing some breakout rooms. I really encourage you to connect with each other and use the chat. We're also going to be doing some collective note taking a little bit later on and using a shared Google document that we can all add to. At the end of the day, you can also download that or save that link and refer back to it as a resource in the future. So really hoping that we get some good participation today. Couple notes with our note-taking document there. If for some reason you need to undo, you can always use Control-Z or press the little undo button. And then I like to add a little asterisk or star to things that you agree with. For me, it's kind of like virtual head nodding. Also, just a couple session agreements. Like I was saying, try to be here, be present. I also want to point out that everyone's an expert. So we're really hoping that you can all share and speak up and share your knowledge with us and with each other. Really encourage everyone to have your camera on if possible. And then, like I mentioned earlier, use the chat to connect with each other. And then this is one of my favorites. It's okay to be raggedy. We're all working through this together. So have some compassion for yourself and for your peers. And it's okay. We're thinking through things. We're working through things. And then lastly, what's true today might be different tomorrow. And I think that's something that's always important to keep in mind. So today, I just want to review real quickly before we really dive into things. Our overall goal is to learn the principles of Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. We're going to look at some of the roles of the different people involved in managing Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. We're going to look at some of the benefits, as well as similarities and differences versus traditional wild and scenic rivers. So we've got some different objectives that you can see there. I'm not going to read them all out, but we're also going to be exploring the Partnership Wild and Scenic River Toolkit as well in today's session. So thank you to those who are writing into the chat. It's great to have you all here. And now we're going to kind of dive into things. So first, we just want to ask, like, well, what do you know about Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers? So I encourage you to start jotting some things down. Here's some prompts like, when did you first hear about them? Or how do they interplay with your work? What do they mean to you? And in a second here, we are going to go into some breakout rooms, and we're just going to share with each other for about 5 to 7 minutes on what we already know about Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. I also encourage you all at this time to introduce yourselves and say hello. So I'm going to start making these breakout rooms here. And you don't have to do anything. It's just going to automatically kind of shoot you off, and then I will bring you back when we are done. All right. Here. I'm going to send us off right now. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I think
some of us got, we weren't able to get back in, so we had to sign out of the meeting completely and come back in. So I'm not sure if that happened to other folks as well.
Okay. Weird. Well, I see some people are coming back in now. Apologies for any problems people might have had. Looked like there was some good discussion going on in those different breakout rooms, and I think everyone had a good chance to kind of share what they know about Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. And now I'm going to introduce our shared collective note-taking document here. So I'm going to add a link to the chat, and I'm going to have everyone open that up in a window. And this is where we're all going to be kind of adding in, typing in, accessing this shared document here. So again, go to that link in the chat and open that up in your own window to be able to add to this. Right now you see it on my screen, but you can't just click here and type right into that. You'll have to open it into your own window.
Angie, it looks like the link that you put in the chat takes you to session 1.
Yep, that's last time's. Whoops. Sorry, everyone. I'm gonna put a new link in, but all right. Apologies for that. I just put the new link into the chat. There we go. I was wondering why I wasn't seeing all these little anonymous animals showing up. So I see people are coming into the shared note. So kind of based on what you were discussing in your groups, if you have anything to add to this, like what do you already know about Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers? And you can kind of come down here, you can select a bullet, type in something. If you hit enter, it's going to add a new line. Also, if you'd like to share out via unmuting yourself, you can either raise your hand or just go ahead and unmute. See some good notes coming in here. Some notes about some different land ownership and co-management. Not too much. Well, you're in the right spot. Hopefully leave here today with some more knowledge about the Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers approach. I'm seeing some themes of private land ownership, the word private's coming up a lot. Cool. I think we're going to get a little bit into this a little bit more. So throughout today, we're going to be again using this shared document to kind of take notes. And then at the end of today, you can always come back, save this link, bookmark it, or you can even come over here to the upper right-hand corner and download this into your own document to take away. I'll be sending this recording out to everyone after, as well as the link to the shared notes. So I encourage you to keep adding in things that are useful. But at this time, I want to introduce a couple people that we've got helping out today who are going to be sharing some knowledge around Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. We've got Liz Lacy and Emma Lord joining us. If you each want to do a brief introduction, that'd be great. And then we'll hop into some info about Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers.
Hi there, Liz Lacy here. I've worked with the Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers program with the Park Service for over 20 years and mostly in the Northeast and in Southern New England. And I look forward to sharing some of what we've learned about this work with you this afternoon.
Hi all, Emma Lord, also with the National Park Service with the Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers program. I am based in Concord, New Hampshire, and I've been with the program for about 3 years.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz and Emma, so much for being here. We're super excited to have you here. And I think I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you, Emma, to get us started.
Great, thanks. Did you want to switch screens? We're still seeing your Google Doc. Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so we wanted to start off kind of with a little brief history of Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers in a nutshell. So 1968, we have the passage of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act to protect rivers across the country for their free flow and their outstandingly remarkable values. But a lot of those early river designations were predominantly on public lands out in the Western United States. So as we move forward, there's really a need for a management model that incorporates mixed land ownership. I know a lot of folks in that Google Talk mentioned the term private land ownership. So there was a need to kind of have a management scheme for wild and scenic rivers that incorporated lots of different landowners, lots of different partners and organizations. So we move into the 1970s and 80s, and some of that starts to happen. We have the Upper Delaware River, which is the border of New York and Pennsylvania. They start to have things like the designation included land acquisition caps, things like local zoning. That was the predominant kind of scheme for river protection, rather than having a federal agency, in this case, the National Park Service, come in and acquire additional land to protect the river. They really relied on local zoning as the predominant river protection strategy. And this was also the first time that we started to see local river management councils come into the picture. So those were made up of different state agencies, local municipalities, and other partners. We also had in the 80s, the Wildcat River. This was the first instance where the actual river management plan was written during the study process. So before the river was actually designated as a wild and scenic river, this group got together, again, lots of different partners between the state, U.S. Forest Service, different municipalities, and developed this river management plan before it was actually designated. So this is kind of shifting into the current partnership model that we see today. So in 1992, the Great Egg Harbor River in New Jersey was our first true partnership wild and scenic river. And actually this, the Great Egg Harbor, with its designation, was actually designated as a national park unit. But then subsequent designations of partnership rivers were not designated specifically as park units. So you can skip to the next slide. So today we have 18 official partnership wild and scenic rivers. Again, 1992 being the first. They're predominantly all east of the Mississippi. We have most of them up in the Northeast United States, with one down in Florida. Next slide. And then most recently in December of 2022, we had our two most recent additions, being the Housatonic River in Connecticut and the York River in Maine, being designated as Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. We'll pass it to Liz.
So another interesting piece of information about Partnership Rivers is that they get funding every year through Congress. They have specialized funding to work with agency staff and to fund the projects that these local councils that Emma mentioned with the various players on the river. They actually get funding each year through cooperative agreements, and Section 11B1 is sort of where that comes from, the ability to provide and give some financial assistance to local areas for planning and doing river protection. So it can go to nonprofits, to states, to localities to do the river protection work that's in the management plan that Emma also mentioned before. And it applies to wild and scenic rivers, these Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers, but also funding under Section 11B1 can go to rivers that aren't designated. Just as an aside, you can get some staff assistance potentially to help with becoming a wild and scenic river or to do other projects. So the basis for Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers is, it's sort of developed a pattern over the years, and that's why we now have so many, and we're sort of managing them in a similar way. And most of them really have no federal land ownership, and they have no ownership of land by the federal government when they get designated. And in fact, a lot of the legislation specifies that there won't be any new federal lands. And that makes that appealing to a lot of areas because they realize that a lot of what the river looks like and the ownership patterns will stay the same. There's also administration and governance through a local council, like Emma mentioned, and most of the time these local councils come from strong nonprofits in the area, state government, local governments, and other interested kind of agencies or organizations that happen to be active on those rivers. And what's also nice about this is that in developing the designation for these rivers, we look at existing laws that already protect the river. We may encourage folks to adopt more local protections in order to get designated, but basically that local scheme keeps things in local control, and people really like that. And then also, as Emma mentioned before, a unique thing about Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers is that well before designation, folks start working on developing the management plan. And it really helps guide the management, lays out what kinds of protections you want to have in place, but it also guides how the different management councils function and operate. And they really do share the responsibility of management. There's a lot of the local regulations, the state regulations, the Federal Wild and Scenic Rivers Act plays into it, provides some teeth for federally permitted and federally funded programs that may come along that it would affect the ORVs on a river. And it's really looked at as, all of the various entities who join this council who are managing the river are making a management scheme that you might otherwise see done by an entire staff of agency folks. And rather it's done amongst folks who are already interested in how to manage the river. A lot of the participation on the councils, particularly from towns or nonprofits, are volunteers. We have a tremendous amount of volunteers on our rivers, and it really makes things work, and it's really valued. And we look at that as a really necessary component of making the Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers sort of scheme work. And then again, we have federal assistance, both financial and staff assistance, to help develop the management plan, to help through studying rivers, and then finally, helping to assist these local councils in implementing their river management plans. Now I guess we're back to Emma.
Yes. So in our breakout groups, it sounded like folks were at least familiar with Wild and Scenic Rivers, and or they attended the first session of this webinar series. So this may look a little familiar, but similar to kind of our traditional Wild and Scenic Rivers, Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers, in order to be designated, have to be both eligible and suitable to become a Wild and Scenic River. So this process typically plays out. The Park Service conducts a 3-year study process in which we kind of review the river and its resources and determine, is it free flowing and does it possess one or more outstandingly remarkable values that would give it that eligibility. And then again, the suitability piece, I think, is potentially even more important for Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. Looking at, should these rivers actually be protected? Will the rivers be protected based on local zoning and bylaws and ordinances? And I think most importantly, does the community support a Wild and Scenic River designation? Because in the study process, if the communities aren't on board, it's kind of hard to go in and say, we want to designate this river if the local folks aren't supportive of that. So that's a big piece of the study process. So Liz and I have both mentioned kind of these local river management or river stewardship councils a few times. And again, they're kind of made up of our main nonprofit partners locally, as well as municipalities, state agencies, and other local folks who have a hand in kind of conservation, land protection, water protection. So each of these different entities kind of has a different role on the stewardship councils. So we have our Wild and Scenic River agencies. In the case of our Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers, that's the National Park Service. And as Liz mentioned, providing technical assistance, that financial assistance through cooperative agreements, and then conducting Section 7 reviews of water resources projects that could impact the rivers and their resources. Then we have our local partners. That could be a watershed association, land trusts, other types of groups like that. And they help to coordinate some of the activities and projects in implementing the river stewardship plan or the river management plan. And then we have also some other nonprofits that may be involved more peripherally. So that might be land trusts doing land protection in the watershed, or providing matching funding or in-kind services to help get some of these projects done. And then also, the piece about talking to Congress and advocating for the program and getting additional funding for their rivers in future years. So that's a big part of the nonprofit role. And here's a nice little handy chart, just looking at our more traditional Wild and Scenic Rivers versus the partnership approach, some of the main differences. So as we mentioned, traditional Wild and Scenic Rivers are primarily out in the Western United States, managed through the federal agencies, flowing primarily through federal land. And then the partnership approach, obviously, as we've been talking about, there's more of a mosaic of land ownership with private lands, state lands, some federal lands, county lands. And again, the local land use laws and zoning is kind of what drives the river protection. And as Liz mentioned, there's no additional federal land acquisition with a partnership designation.
All right, so we just reviewed some content about the history, the principles, and some of the surface level or the most common similarities and differences. I'm gonna put that shared notes link back in the chat, encourage you to go back to this shared note document. And you can see down below our second prompt here and third one. what are some of the similarities between Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers and traditional Wild and Scenic Rivers? And then down below, we've also got, what are the differences? You know, might be easier to think about it that way, whatever works for you. And if you're fairly familiar with Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers, I challenge you to think about some of maybe like the lesser known similarities and differences beyond the ones that we shared in that previous slide. Also, while you're thinking through this real quick, I'm just going to go back to that slideshow, and I wanted to point out we've got a couple videos down in the corner. There's actually a link at the bottom of that shared document where we've got some resources. Feel free to add any resources that you find useful in your work with Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. And this is just a nice little review of Wild and Scenic River, like a traditional Wild and Scenic River, and then an awesome video about Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers that if you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to go check out after today's training. So I just wanted to highlight that. And again, you can find those resources at the very bottom where we've got a bunch of different links and things. So, all right, I'm going to come back here to these similarities and differences. Nice, I see both are free flowing, have ORVs, partnerships are critical, both have valuable resources, and yeah. Ooh, Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers have councils. Some traditional Wild and Scenic Rivers might, but don't always. Anyone have anything they'd like to add? You're welcome to unmute and share verbally as well.
Yeah, that's a good, the bullet point about some traditional wild and scenic rivers might have councils or friends groups. I think that's very true. You know, what we've just kind of gone over is the capital P Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers, but I think a lot of these same values and kind of processes and kind of partnership models are occurring on kind of the more traditional wild and scenic rivers through friends groups or other kind of coalitions like that.
The other thing is that partnership rivers, even though they're managed differently, have exactly the same protections that a regular congressionally designated river would have. There's no difference at all. It's just really the way the rivers are managed and who plays a role in the various aspects.
Jeffrey, I see your mouth was moving and you unmuted, but we didn't hear you. No, we still can't hear you.
Any sound now?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, I had the volume down too far. I was double muted. So did I understand the point correctly that federal monies are frozen for buying land to establish wild and scenic rivers?
I would not say that they're frozen so much as that in the legislation for partnership rivers, there's a clause in there that says that no new land will be condemned or, you know, purchased by the government for this designation. Land, yeah, so that hopefully it's a local land protection scheme that takes place as opposed to the federal government spending money on buying up land in the river area.
And we do have some scenarios. There's a few rivers that flow through national wildlife refuges in the Northeast. And sometimes the wildlife refuge will acquire land, additional lands for the refuge itself, but not necessarily tied to the wild and scenic designation.
Great question. And if anyone else has any questions, feel free to speak up and ask them. You're welcome to unmute. You can also put them in the chat and we'll read them out.
I had a question about the the legislation that was just mentioned about Partnership Rivers specifically. Can you put that in the chat or say what is that in the original WSR? Is it an additional amendment? Like where does that legislation lie in that language?
So I think you're asking, is there a public law that you can look at that shows the language for the designations? I think that if that's the question, you can probably look at rivers.gov and the listing of designated rivers, and the public laws are probably associated with that. Is that correct, Emma? Are the public laws, the congressional language with each designation linked to the rivers in that chart on rivers.gov?
Yeah, they are. And I know, I'm not sure what I have to look into this, but as Liz mentioned in the legislation, it talks about the management scheme, and that's going to be a partnership Wild and Scenic River. I know our recent designations have included that term, it will be managed as a partnership Wild and Scenic River. I think some of the earlier partnership designations, when the program wasn't as well established, didn't have that direct language, but the recent designations definitely have that specific language in them.
Thanks, Emma. That's kind of what I was getting at. I'll check out that resource. Bye.
Any other questions or thoughts that people want to share? Well, I guess we can kind of shift down then and start thinking about what are some of the benefits of the Partnership Wild and Scenic River approach? And at the same time, maybe like, what are some of the perceived challenges?
So do we need to go back to the slides for that?
Yeah.
Because I was going to do a little
Go.
spiel, and then we'll see. Did you want to go over what people might see as benefits and challenges before we go through my list? Was that what you were heading towards, or?
I might have jumped the gun on you, so sorry, Liz.
No, that's okay. I can go through these, and then folks can think of other things too as we move on to the document again. But some of this might be repetitive to things we've already said, but just to reemphasize that the river management plan is generated during the study process and before designation. So actually, if for some reason the river isn't designated, that group of people who put together that plan prior to designation still have a plan that they can take on in whatever form they want to, regardless of designation. So that's kind of a nice benefit. You get a lot of work done on and some funds and some staff to actually study your area. And if for some reason, say there's not enough community support to follow through on the designation, you still have that plan in front of you. A lot of folks feel that the designation brings a lot of national recognition and, sort of something to be proud of in their area. And that's probably true for all wild and scenic rivers, but I think in partnership areas, it helps the partners do leveraging and other kinds of things. And, just being able to be proud of the river in a way that may not have been in place before. In some cases, folks use the designation to really draw attention to their river, and that can bring more tourism. If it's acted on, it can bring more tourism to the area and bring more dollars to local areas. The other thing is that we have the federal review of federally permitted and funded projects, and that for a lot of folks has been a big stumbling block that they haven't had a voice in Army Corps permits or FEMA funding projects or those kinds of things. And with the Park Service or the agency coming in and becoming a partner there, they have the ability to make projects a little bit more river friendly or work in the local area a whole lot better. Again, we get technical and financial assistance from the agencies to do river planning and the projects that are associated with those plans. The cooperative agreement is a mechanism where in this case, the National Park Service goes through an agreement process with what we call fiscal agents of possibly a watershed association or a land trust or something like that, who actually takes on doing the finances and doing all the federal forms and that sort of thing for the local councils. And that's a really great mechanism, that having that cooperative agreement to be able to funnel the funds to the local projects is really great. The other thing that we notice is that we can leverage other agency funding a little bit because of the Wild and Scenic designation, but also the partner status. Next slide. So again, leveraging other grants, some foundation, National Park Foundation, other kinds of grants are sometimes more accessible given this kind of a thing. We also have a lot of leveraging that we like to try to keep track of. I mentioned volunteers before, but all of the different communities that are involved have so many things going on that become leverage points for protecting the river. If there's a spill, maybe the state and the local government chip in and actually help deal with that spill and that sort of thing. So that's another big plus, having those partners in place. And we already talked about the review of the projects. And, one of the most wonderful things about Partnership Rivers is this whole council, the local river council, really guiding through the development of the plan, all the way into deciding what projects they do and directing the funds that they get and the technical assistance. For as long as we can see into the future, they're going to have these resources to protect the river. And those river councils are tremendous help, so much more effective in some cases than we could have possibly imagined. So that's my list, I think, of benefits.
Yeah. So maybe come back here. Think of some of the benefits. I know Liz just mentioned a whole bunch, but also a time to think of some of the perceived challenges that might be associated.
And not to put anyone on the spot, but I know there are a couple of folks from some of our Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers on the call, and I'd invite them to share any specific benefits or any challenges they've had.
See some people adding to the sheet. No perceived challenges yet. And again, for anyone who might have been kicked out and had to rejoin, I'm putting the link to these shared notes in the chat again. All right, now I see some things coming in for perceived challenges. Ooh, working in a council with multiple viewpoints can slow decision-making processes. And again, anyone who's got experience with this, feel free to add in or elaborate or share how maybe you've worked through some of these challenges. Continuity and management if NGOs and local interest changes. Identifying user capacity among stakeholders. The council deciding which projects or priorities to accomplish. Liz or Emma, I don't know if you have anything to speak to some of these.
Well, I'm really like interested in that people are coming up with some of these things, because yes, working with a committee can definitely have its challenges in terms of, you know, decision making and people having different priorities and different ways that they want to spend the money. And continuity is definitely a stumbling block. Sometimes you have turnover on these councils, turnover on local governments and that sort of thing. And so, yes, there are those kinds of challenges, but there are probably, I would guess, in a traditional setting, you have sort of analogous kind of challenges, but definitely those things exist, and there is an amount of you know, working together and being a coalition and, you know, having good leadership, good local leadership to help direct the local council. That's not something that the agency can do. The agency can't go in and just tell the councils what to do. And sometimes they look for that, but that's not something we can do. And so we have to just, you know, trust that folks locally are going to resolve conflicts, resolve their priority differences, and work together. But yeah, working by committee has its challenges.
And that's an interesting point about the user capacities. I know some of the rivers in the Northeast have, you know, huge amounts of recreational use, others not so much. And, you know, we've heard that as a concern. Some rivers who have reached out that are interested in designation, concern that designation would bring more people to the river when they're maybe already at capacity in terms of recreational use. So it's definitely an issue that many rivers are grappling with.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks, since during and since the pandemic, recreational use has skyrocketed, and so even folks in agency areas are having to redo their management schemes for visitor use management and capacities. And in some ways, there are the tools out there. That's another one of my favorite topics, is visitor use management. But there are tools out there, and we're trying to develop more tools that non-federally owned areas can use in their situations, so that it's not such a struggle to manage the changes that are taking place in those areas.
All right. Any other comments, questions that people have right now?
Definitely some good points being made there.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to pop back over here to our slideshow.
So yeah, so now that you've gotten this really sort of quick and sort of you know, bird's eye view kind of Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers, you may be thinking, you know, really, is this something that my river or a river that I know of could actually take on. And there's some questions to ask that would definitely help figure out if this is the right fit. And, you know, probably the most important one is there a history of high local involvement and commitment to the river? Are there people who've been working for years to, you know, who are dedicated to river management, whether it's nonprofits, friends groups, citizen groups, the state, you know, different departments at the state level, different communities who have different programs. If you've got the ingredients of people who are highly involved already, then that makes a big difference if you're heading towards a partnership river kind of management scheme. The other thing is, you know, you have all the ingredients to do a wild and scenic river, but it's not a federally owned area. And you're trying to figure out, you know, how do we add this protection? And how do we manage it if we don't have an agency covering all the land, if it's not federally owned? And so again, if there's a mix of the ownership, this partnership management style is really probably effective in pulling people together to sit at a table to do the management. The other thing is, you know, this is sort of overlapping with just any wild and scenic river designation. Are there, you know, special resources within the area that really need protection? Are there unique, outstandingly remarkable values that you think everyone in that area would be willing to work towards to protect? And as I said, are there good local and agency partners to work with? Do you have a willing bunch of towns or counties or, you know, state government who are accessible and willing to go into this for the long haul? Because it's not just a designate and walk away. This is something you have to stick with year after year after year. As if it became a national park or something like that. You become the staff to this area. Everybody has to keep, you know, giving to that partnership. And then the other thing is, you know, you really need champions in Congress to help usher this through, you know, and it can take a long time. So are there folks in Congress that represent your area who would be open to talking about this and being responsive to, you know, having another layer of protection on your river, and also, you know, taking the time to support this in Congress? And then after, you know, maybe the study and into designation, are they going to be willing to help with their group of Congress folks who fund this program each year in partnership with our partners out on the river? And then the last thing is the Nationwide Rivers Inventory, which was created a long time ago, lists a bunch of rivers all over the country that were guessed to be potentially good for a wild and scenic designation. So if your river is listed on that database, then that gives you a leg up. I think it's probably possible if you're not on that list. This is a fairly, you know, there's a lot of work going into updating this list. If your river's not there, that doesn't mean you can't become wild and scenic, but you would have to, you know, give some good arguments for why it would be a good river to include in the system. So that package of questions is a good one, and some thought going into all those things would be good if you're thinking about doing partnership management on a river.
So we're going to pause real quick and see if there's any questions or any points that people would like to add before we go into our next little activities. So again, you can unmute or you can drop them in the chat and I'll read them out loud. Yeah, Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a good presentation. You're doing a good job. I have a question that some degree of uncertainty in, and that's involving this study for potentially new partnership wild and scenic rivers. So is an act of Congress for a study designation always required? It's kind of a two-part question. Is it always required? And how does the work do the study?
So I missed that second part, Fred. Could you say that second part again? Oh, unmute. There you go.
It was a question about the funding for studies. Where does that come from?
Ah, yes. The funding usually is sort of separate from the Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers budget, and it's through park planning. And there's usually a certain amount that's put into that. We have sort of the internal workings of the agency put aside a certain amount of money for studies. And if they know something's coming up, if there is a study that's designated, that comes from a park planning budget. And does that answer your question, Fred? What was the first part again?
For a study, does a study always require an act of Congress, like a study bill, or are there circumstances where the agency would initiate that?
I think that, and Emma, jump in at any time if you know more details than I do here. But I believe that Congress can do pretty much what it wants. So if there was a Congress person out there who wanted to see a river designated, they could just ask for it to be added to the system. That's rare, but that's actually way back in the beginning in 1968. A bunch of rivers were just automatically designated as part of that original legislation. But I think that it's, from our perspective, it's better to do a study. There are some rivers who, like the Housatonic that just got designated, was studied a long time ago in 79. They did not get designation at that time. And so basically, they had a study done. They went through a very convoluted process. They were going to become a state administered river and then decided to go for congressional designation with a Partnership Wild and Scenic River. And the evaluation that was done for a potential state administered river sufficed for an update to the study that had been done in 1979. So there are all kinds of different ways that these things play out. But I think that the traditional way and probably the most beneficial to a river area is to have that study done and to do the management plan as a part of that study. Would you agree, Emma?
Yeah, I would just add that, historically we've done the study process, the study bill, 3-year study process. And then, sometimes there's been a big gap in time between when the study finishes and when the river is actually designated. But I think, one of the most important parts of that study process is that suitability piece. So, does the local community want this? Because obviously, like Liz said, Congress can do what they want, but, if the local community doesn't want it, it doesn't really make sense for them to just designate the river if that's not what the community wants.
Absolutely.
Stefan or Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, it's Stephen. Thanks. This is more of a general question, and maybe I missed this in the intro, but I'm wondering, why is it concentrated in the Northeast? So I'm in the Northwest and in Oregon specifically, and I'm just wondering, what are partnerships looking like out here for Wild and Scenic Rivers? And then are there any in the works, or anybody that I can kind of look at and kind of follow their process and understand what's going on? Yeah, and if not, what are the barriers to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that topic comes up a lot. I think just historically, they're concentrated in the Northeast just because historically there's a lot of local watershed association, a lot of conservation groups, and like Fred could talk to this more, but obviously the first Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers, and locally, other groups heard about it, so it kind of just expanded and branched out from there geographically. But we've definitely had some inquiries from other areas of the country about this model. so there's no reason why it can't be or shouldn't be expanded to other parts of the country.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think-
great.
Yeah, I'll make
Yeah.
a couple comments. I
go
think
ahead.
that Congress likes this program in the Northeast. So members of Congress are really kind of key, or have been key. And the second thing is that the Northeast region was very instrumental in starting the program and helping it to grow. So the National Park Service Northeast region is really good at it. I don't know about the other regions, if they like the idea of it. And they don't seem to be promoting it, but Congress is the key out here.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but the one other thing that Emma touched on was that the reason it started in the Northeast is, as you can tell, there are not huge tracts of federal lands in the Northeast. But people were interested in becoming a wild and scenic river. I think that was one of the ways that some of the local folks that Emma was referring to said, wild and scenic would be great for our river, but we don't have any federal land. And so there was an effort made by staff in the Northeast region to figure out a way to do a management scheme that would pass muster and could get these rivers designated as wild and scenic.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and Stephen, I'll even add into, I've heard, I don't think it's like a capital P partnership at all, but I know it's not. But if you look at like the Upper Deschutes River, I think it's wild and scenic, and there's been some successful partnerships on helping to co-manage as it's going through like some non-federal lands. So that might be a starting place to look at in Oregon.
Okay,
well.
that's great. Yeah, I'll check that out.
Noah, I saw you had your hand up at one point. I don't know if you still have a question or something to add.
Yeah, I was just going to speak to Fred's question. So part of the Bureau of Land Management's, our resource management plans for our field offices, we go through and we review whether or not we support suitability or eligibility for wild and scenic rivers within our field office. And so if you go to our RMP for our office, you can see that we have made that determination, and then it kind of has just been sitting there. So we have found rivers that are suitable, we feel they're eligible, but until they're championed, that's where they stand. And so when the RMP does get updated, I believe that process then again is reviewed for whether or not we might want to add or we might take that away at that point. I don't know, but currently that's in our RMP, and that's part of our process for our resource management plans for the BLM.
Thanks, Noah. Anyone else have any other questions, comments? Well, I know that we've tried to pack a lot of information into this like last hour, and you're probably going to think of more questions once we get out of here. And so we'd like to share a resource, and we're trying to think of a fun way to do it. And so we're going to have a short, quick little scavenger hunt of the Partnership Wild and Scenic River Toolkit. And so I'm going to put a link in the chat here to the Partnership Toolkit and encourage you to open that. And but before we go into our activity, I'm going to give you a little tour of the Partnership Wild and Scenic River Toolkit. And then we're going to do an activity where we're going to give you a prompt. We're going to have you search through on your browser through the Partnership Toolkit, see if you can find the answer. And then once you have it, we're going to have you enter it in the chat. But first, just a little quick tour. This is in partnership with RMS. We've got it on our website here, and this toolkit has a ton of great information, so much information. And so when you open it up, this is the main page you come to. It's got a map. I think that map needs to be updated with the 2022 rivers, but can give you an idea of where most of the partnership rivers are. Little history here. But if I scroll back to the top, across this top here, you see 1, explore, 2, study, and 3, designate. These are kind of the 3 main sections of the toolkit. When I click on explore, you can always go back to that homepage here at this link on the top. It's got a lot of awesome questions here and answers. Again, tons of information. This page is really long, so you can spend a whole bunch of time going through that. If we go over to number 2, study. This page is really geared towards people who are doing the study process for Partnership River or Partnership Model. And then each of these expand out and can have great information about starting your study, who might be involved, public engagement and outreach, some examples. And then again, at the top, if I go to number 3, designate. There's some great links here. Again, some frequently asked questions, but also the Partnership Wild Scenic River news. And this has a lot of great news, updates, things going on about Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers as well. So we're going to be doing our little activity here. So I hope you all have that up. Again, I'm going to give you a prompt here on this, and I'm on the screen, and I'm also going to read it out. And then I'm going to have you go search for the answer and put it into the chat. So our first prompt is, or question is, how long is the study process for a Partnership Wild and Scenic River? And if I was really thinking ahead, I would have had some like Jeopardy thinking music going on right now, but I'm sure you've all heard it, so you can be imagining that right now. But once you have the answer or think you have the answer, go ahead and put it in the chat. Again, the question is, how long is the study process for Partnership Wild and Scenic River? All right, Lucy, first one to respond, 3 years with a question mark. Lucy, do you want to share where you maybe found that, or is that?
Well, you guys have all said it throughout today's talk, so the 3-year study just stuck in my brain.
Awesome.
Thanks.
And oh, go ahead, Liz.
I was just going to say, and we hope that it's 3 years. That's what we describe and hope that it's 3 years.
All right, next one might be not as easy, we'll see. But who makes up the study team? See lots of people searching. All right, I see Brenna. Brenna, do you want to unmute and elaborate? I see your response. PWSR study committees or study teams typically include appointed members. Where did you find that information, Brenna? I would love to know.
So I found it under the study tab under starting your study and then study committee formation.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Brenna. Nicely done. And then we just have one more question here. Is the management plan developed during this study? Lucy got that one, yes. And I know we did mention that earlier. You can also find that information under the study tab. So this short little exercise was really just to get you all exploring around this Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers toolkit and seeing all the information that's in there. Again, we can only share so much in 90 minutes. And so there's a lot of great resources that you can go back to there. Nice. Patrick, I see you've got for PWSRs, the local comprehensive river management plan. Well, is developed during the study. Nice. So cool. Any other questions about where to find information or certain questions that you might have of that you're not seeing an answer to or that might have come up in the last few minutes? Feel free to start thinking of those. And I did want to go back to our handout here and just highlight here at the bottom, the very bottom of our collaborative document. What are some resources for those who are interested in learning more, exploring more? And we do have that toolkit link as our top one. Also, that really awesome video about Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. I encourage you to go check that out and check out the website. Has information about each of the designated rivers. I can show you that real quick here. So you've got the video right here, river connections. And then if you go down, has a bunch of the different Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers, and you can go to their individual pages. Also back on our collaborative document, we did put that short little video about traditional wild and scenic rivers. It just kind of says that there's CRMPs or comprehensive river management plans, the values, outlines the values that wild and scenic rivers are protected for. We've also got the link to that nationwide rivers inventory. And then I threw in a bunch of links to some of the different wild and Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers here if you wanted to go see what their stewardship council might look like or how it's organized or any example documents. And then you can also see Emma and Liz have put their email down below, and you know, you can always reach out if you have any other questions that are coming up. All right, so we've got one last activity, and for those who might have joined on our first session, this might look familiar, but we're going to do a short little reflection here with some climber cards. I'm going to put a link into the chat, have you click on it and open that up. And I'd like you to select a card that represents your view of Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers. And so there's a bunch of different images that you can choose from. You can scroll down and find more and more. So select a card that represents your view of Wild and Scenic Rivers. And then once you select it, you can enter your name if you'd like, and then why you chose your card. So give everyone a minute or two. And there's no right answer, no wrong answer here. This is just meant to be just a nice little reflection from what we have been thinking about today. All right. Well, I think some responses are starting to come in, so I'm going to show them here on my screen. Oh, nice. Sharon said PWSRs allow more opportunities for people to enjoy and recreate on rivers. Couldn't agree more, Sharon. Monica, I think PWSR opens doors for designating rivers in areas with less federal land and also encourages partnerships and local involvement. Definitely. Nice, Fred. These gears mesh like the partners of the PWSR program. What's fun is sometimes people choose the same images, sometimes people choose different images. So it's kind of cool to see some of the trends.
I was going to choose the same one Emma did for, that's really funny.
Jeff, all the birds and organizations are in line with each other. I like that. Some great reflections here. Anyone want to share out anything else on their reflection or elaborate? Anything they notice? Well, I think I'm going to go back to our slides here. Oh, nice, some similar ones. I'm going to go back to our slides here, and now's our time. We've got about 9 minutes left in our session for any lingering questions. What do you want to know about PWSRs that you didn't learn about today, or any final thoughts that you might have if you've been working with Partnership Wild and Scenic Rivers, and advice you have for others who might be interested in it? So now is the time to ask, and again, you can unmute or you can throw it in the chat.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. The York River was just designated in December, and I kind of followed the process. So it was like the 17th Partnership Wild and Scenic River. And there was a part of the process that I didn't know about, and was that after the study was done, it went back to the Park Service, and it had to be put out to the public for public comment for a time. And once that time was up, then it was kind of like finally finished. And one or two of the legislators in Maine wanted to wait until that process was done so they could look at what the comments were. This was on the Senate side before they decided that they were going to support it. So the process, it might be a little longer. It was a little longer than I thought it would be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Yeah, and actually reaching out to the public and getting public comments on these various studies and evaluations is definitely required practice. But most of the time, I would say we have, the majority of positive comments. I don't think we've run into many negative ones over the years.
Any other last questions or comments? Not seeing any. I always give it an extra second because I know sometimes people are typing. Well, I just want to say thanks again to all of you for joining us. A big thanks to Liz and Emma for helping out with this session. And again, feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions or where to find resources. As I mentioned before, I will be sending out a link to the recording. You can also find it on our YouTube channel. If you go to River Management Society's YouTube channel, it'll be posted there probably within a day. It takes a little bit of time to download and edit and upload. But I'll be sending that out as well as a link to the collaborative notes that we were taking. And then just a quick reminder that we'll be meeting again. It was part of this series for the third session. It's going to be on wild and scenic river values. So we'll be diving a little bit deeper into those next month on Wednesday, March 15th, same time, different link. So hopefully you're already registered for that, but if not, hope to see you there. Hope to get you registered and see you there. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thank
Glad
you.
you're
Thanks, all.
here.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.